One of the most misused words nowadays is the term triggered. In this video, I'm going to talk about what is a trigger, what is not, and then I'm going to teach you how to process triggers so that you can help yourself get out of that state, so that you can stop feeling controlled by your triggers and empower yourself to create a greater sense of well-being in your life. What is a trigger? This is a word that is specific to PTSD and CPTSD. It's an event that sets off a chain reaction that reminds you of a trauma in the past. So that could be a memory, a flashback, or intense emotional feelings. Your triggers are going to come through your five senses and also through your thoughts and feelings. So it could be that you see something that reminds you of the past and suddenly you feel triggered. Maybe during a past trauma, you were looking at, a fish tank while it was happening. It had nothing to do with the trauma, but it was like ingrained in your memory. And then someday you're in some restaurant and there's a fish tank there and you walk in and you see the fish tank and you're immediately triggered and you're reliving some kind of memory. It could be something you hear. Maybe your ex had a particular British accent, from Manchester. And now anytime you listen to YouTube or suddenly you hear that exact particular accent, it instantly triggers you into memories of the trauma that happened with that person. It could be a smell. The olfactory nerve, the nerve that goes from your nose, goes right to the memory centers directly in the brain. So maybe your ex wore a certain perfume, lavender, vanilla, something name brand, and you're walking down the street and you smell that suddenly, and all of a sudden you're starting to relive memories of trauma. It could be touch. It could be that there's, maybe you went through some kind of sexual trauma as a child, and now if someone touches a particular part in your abdomen, like it has nothing to do with that trauma exactly, but some part of your abdomen that somehow got programmed into your nervous system, and now anytime anybody touches you there, even in a harmless way, you jump and freak out and start having a whole reliving experience of the past. It could be anniversaries or holidays, anniversaries of deaths, anniversaries of breakups, of some kind of traumatic event, or holidays in general because they remind you of certain things that took place. It could be anger. If you grew up with the kind of abusive person that was raging all the time, it could be that you're terrified of anger. And maybe now you get into a new relationship and the person is a good person, they're not abusive or anything, but like all humans, we all get angry sometimes. And maybe they get angry at somebody did something on the road. But it doesn't matter, that's not about you. When you see that anger, you get like paralyzed and start to have a whole panic attack because you're seeing that anger and it's reminding you of that parent who was raging on you since child. It could be a simple disagreement. It might have been that since childhood, or maybe an ex that you're with a very long time, anytime you got into a disagreement, it became this whole trauma. Like they couldn't allow you to just disagree with them. And so now maybe you're afraid to disagree with people, or maybe if you are in a disagreement, you start panicking and reliving all the past experiences that took place with that. Maybe you learned in childhood that a disagreement meant you were going to get abandoned, that the person was just going to leave you if you had a different opinion than them and you couldn't see things the same way. It could be a person in general. It could be an abusive person. They did something to you in the past, and all of a sudden, you see them again, and you relive the whole experience in your body and in your mind. That could happen with a place. It might even be a place that you didn't know anything happened there. Like that memory might have gotten deleted, because that's often what happened, is the brain will delete a lot of those trauma memories. And then you happen to go to that place and all of a sudden your body is trembling and shivering, and like people can see how your skin is shivering, and you're having a whole experience of being triggered by that place because your body remembers the things that took place there. It could be simply a thought or feeling that you have that triggers that whole experience of reliving some kind of past trauma. In fact, sometimes that's how flashbacks come, is just through a sudden, overwhelming emotional feeling. Not necessarily seeing a vision and a memory of something that happened, but just a very intense feeling. So what happens when you get triggered is, as you're starting to relive that past experience in some kind of sensorial way, you can have all kinds of different reactions to that. Panic attacks, dread attacks, anxiety, trembling, paralysis. If you didn't see the recent video that I did on dread attacks, I mentioned a lot of those responses. I'm going to put that link up here for you if you want to check out that video. So what is not a trigger? As you probably noticed online especially, people are using this word lightly and irresponsibly and out of context. A trigger is not when someone gets offended, upset, or angry at someone else's opinion. A trigger is not a way to blame someone else, meaning using the Darvo technique. If you haven't seen the video I did last year on that, I'm going to put that link up here in the corner for you. It is not a way of blaming someone else instead of taking responsibility for yourself. A trigger is not an evasion tactic to win an argument or to shut down someone else's free speech. Are triggers bad? Not necessarily. You'll see often people putting this negative connotation on them like it's a bad thing. Let me explain. They're very unpleasant, yes, but triggers are offering us an opportunity for healing. They're pointing at the things that we need to process, to clear, to resolve, so that we can move on from the past. Because PTSD and complex PTSD is like your brain gets frozen and stuck in the past. It's like it's on a broken record repetition of the past, forcing you to face those things so you can resolve them, so they can stop having that control over your life. So the very first thing is to start reframing in your mind, if you have a negative connotation of triggers, to tell yourself, this is an opportunity to work on self-healing. So as soon as you get triggered, anytime you're thinking about triggers, remind yourself and start working on reprogramming. This is an opportunity for self-healing. So now I want to teach you a 7-step process that I use to process triggers to create a new sense of mindfulness. So this is in the moment when you recognize that it's happening. Number 1, recognize that you're being triggered. So you immediately need to recognize that and tell yourself inside your mind, I'm being triggered. And as soon as you have that thought and recognition, immediately start taking some deep breaths. Number 2, ask yourself, what am I feeling? And name the feeling. So this might take a little while at first because you might be very disconnected from your feelings. Like there's an overwhelming feeling there, but it's hard for you to figure out what that is, to label it, to articulate what you're feeling. So at first this might take some practice. Eventually this is going to get a lot easier for you. And also probably because the same kinds of things are going to be repeating. So it's going to be like, oh yeah, I already know what this is. That's this again. So identify the feeling, articulate it, label the feeling. Number 3 is to truly allow yourself to feel it. So once you put a word on it, now really focus your awareness on what it feels like in your body, in your mind, in your emotions, in your sensory experience. Really lean into that so you can feel it and identify what that is. Because now when you have that feeling again in the future, your brain is automatically going to go, oh yeah, that's the feeling of, and it puts a label on it. And that immediately starts to take away some of the power that it has over you. Number 4, ask yourself, what event triggered this feeling? So was it an interaction that you just had? Was it a memory that you had? Was it a thought, something you were thinking about? Maybe something that you were planning? Maybe someone said something to you, you read something, or it was just one of those intense, overwhelming experiences of a flashback. Number 5, ask yourself, what past events does this remind me of? When have I felt like that before? Because chances are whatever memory that was or whatever thing was happening in the immediate surroundings that triggered you, chances are that has something to do with the past. And even if it is a past memory, chances are you could still go back further. So maybe you have a memory in your 20s and you ask yourself, but where did I feel that before? And you keep going back and you realize like it initially happened when you were 4 years old or 6 years old or however old you were. And you remember then exactly the scenario that took place, the original trigger. Number 6, ask yourself, okay, what can I do about that now? So if it's something from the past, how can you resolve that? How can you help yourself come to peace with what happened? Do you need to process more feelings? Do you need to simply allow yourself to feel how you felt in that moment, which is how you feel right now, that you got triggered by something else reminding you of that? What do you need to do for yourself? You know, what inner child needs do you have? Because chances are it's your inner child where this is coming from. So figure out what it is that you can do to rescue yourself, to rescue your inner child when you feel this way in this moment. And then number 7 is to take constructive action. Now use that word constructive because we don't want to encourage negative, destructive actions. We don't want any more self-destruction. We don't want any harm to other people. So you got to figure out what it is that you can do about that now and take that action for yourself. So as you put this 7-step process into place and you start practicing this every time in the moment that you get triggered, you're going to notice how much easier it is to deal with those triggered experiences, how much easier it is to deal with all the flashbacks. And what you're going to notice is a diminishment in the intensity and the frequency of those experiences because you're doing something about it. You're not just letting it happen over and over again mindlessly. You're developing a new sense of mindfulness around your triggers. You are taking self-responsibility. This process is self-responsibility because you're taking care of yourself. You're not just going, you triggered me, and just blaming somebody else, you know, for how you feel. Like, you're actually dealing with it. You're helping yourself. This is really important. This is going to help you in that stage 2 of recovery as a survivor and get you out of that victim state. Because you know what happens, even if you are in the 2nd stage, even if you are a survivor, you know what happens when you get triggered? It's like you instantly get pulled back to that victim state and you just want to go back to that state, right? So you got to rescue yourself and you got to pull yourself out of there with self-responsibility and take care of those triggers. Now, I want to talk about the trigger funk. So let's say you didn't rescue yourself. You didn't notice it, or you got lazy, or you went into a state of helplessness and you just talked yourself out of it. You went down the downward spiral, because it's a total downward spiral that happens. It's like the thought comes or the event happens, whatever that is, then the emotions come up to meet it, and then you're just going down and down and down. I mean, it could be hours, it could be days, it could be weeks. So let's say that you didn't rescue yourself and you find yourself in a trigger funk. You can't get yourself out of that funk. I want to give you some tips that you can do to help yourself. So the very first thing is, can you get some therapy? Can you get some EMDR? If you're looking for a therapist, as you know, I no longer do one-on-one coaching sessions, but I have partnered with BetterHelp, and I put the link down below because you'll get 10% off your first month of therapy when you use that link. You can chat with your therapist, you can video talk, you can talk on the phone, you can write like an email. So there's a lot of ways you can do that from the privacy of your own home, or maybe you have a therapist in your area or online that you like to work with. So if you notice that you're in that funk, schedule yourself some therapy. Maybe you prefer something like massage, acupressure, acupuncture. Maybe you want to do that in conjunction with therapy. It's really important to find a good practitioner. Just like with a therapist, you need a good therapist. If you go for some kind of body work, energy work, and the person is not good, you might end up feeling even more triggered and upset afterwards. So you really need to be careful who you're seeking out for these kinds of services, because like if I go to get a massage by somebody who has no consciousness of energy and they just get in there into my field and touch me, I'm going to jump and I'm going to be hyper reactive the entire session. I'm not going to calm down. I'm going to feel more defensive, intense when I leave there than I did walking in. So really be careful about who you recruit for those kinds of things. Some people like to do exercise when they get into that trigger funk. Some kind of intense exercise can help you get out of that state. Some people like to meditate. Personally, like when I'm in that kind of state, that's not the moment to meditate. Meditation for me is like a regular practice that I need to schedule and do. But when I'm in the moment, I need to do something more active or proactive. The meditation is just, I'm going to just stew in that sense of funk. It's going to be hard for me to get myself out of that. But for other people, that could be really helpful. Nature is a wonderful thing to get yourself out of a funk. It's really hard to be in a bad mood when you're standing on the beach and your feet are in the sand and the water, or you go into the forest, you just lay down in the grass and you listen to all the sounds and you're watching the clouds go by, or you're just sitting on the roots of a tree, connecting yourself and feeling really grounded and connected to nature. It's really, really helpful for that. In Peru, my teachers taught me to put your belly button on the ground, so you lay face down and you lift your shirt just a little bit so that your belly button can directly touch the ground. And they call that, like, because that's like your origin, right? Your belly button was like when you were in the womb with your mother, you had the umbilical cord connection. That was like your lifeline, your life connection. And so they talk about putting your belly button onto the ground. Something else that could really help you is singing and dancing. It's hard to be in a bad mood when you put on some reggae or some uplifting, happy kind of song. It's hard to be in a bad mood when you're singing happy songs. It's hard to be in a bad mood when you're dancing around. That kind of movement will be really helpful for your body to just like release stuff. And when you sing, you're opening that throat chakra, which can be really shut down in the state of feeling triggered. Some people enjoy journaling when they get into those states because maybe they want to get some insights, they want to write down a lot of stuff and then look back later. That can be really helpful to understand different layers of things that are going on. And of course, if you have supportive family and friends, that might be a good time to talk to people. When you're in that funk, maybe somebody can help you get out of that funk a little bit. Maybe they can offer you some kind of insight, something that you didn't see or you didn't want to see, and somehow that helps you to get out of that funk. So to wrap this up, I have 3 really important pieces of advice. The very first one is understand your triggers are your responsibility. I know that's something not a lot of people want to hear because it's a lot easier to blame others. But you have to recognize that the triggers come with the PTSD. They are your responsibility to resolve. It doesn't mean that what happened in the trauma was not your fault. It was not your fault. But it does mean that you are responsible for your life now. If you want a better life, if you want to stop feeling like that, if you want to move forward out of that PTSD, you have to take responsibility for yourself. Number 2, give yourself time and patience. Reprogramming this stuff from the nervous system is not overnight. It's not like you did it one time and you're like, Meredith, it doesn't work. No, like you have to do this over time, right? So be patient with yourself and understand that it takes time and you need to do the work because the time itself is not going to make it go away. I promise you, if you do not do the work, this is going to repeat and repeat and repeat ad nauseum in your life. So you have to do the work, but you also have to remember to have patience with yourself. You got to keep going and recognize that you're doing the work. Remind yourself, give yourself a pat on the back that you're doing the work. You're taking responsibility for your life, and have the patience that over time you're going to see a big reduction in these feelings. And number 3, avoid the triggers in terms of like people and places if possible. So if you know that a certain person is going to trigger you because they're an abusive, manipulative person, don't go around them, right? Don't hang out with them. Work on getting out of a situation if you're in one of those situations that you can't leave right now, a roommate, a job, family member, something like that. Work on getting out of that so you can avoid. And in the meanwhile, avoid as much as possible. Close yourself in your room, close yourself in your office, have the most minimum amount of contact. If it's a place that triggers you because something bad happened there and you remember what that is, don't go to that place for a while. And yeah, it's unfair that you have to avoid a place because it causes you overwhelming amounts of emotions right now, but understand that down the road, you can reclaim the places in your life. It's just that in the initial stages of healing, you want to eliminate those things if possible. You are going to have enough things to deal with internally, enough triggers that come up internally from memories of the past, that it's not going to halt your recovery process if you avoid people and places like that. So I hope this video was helpful for you to understand more about what triggers are, what they are not, and how you can take responsibility and rescue yourself so that you can process all of that overload that's making up the PTSD, all of those triggers and things and feelings that are happening from the past memories. You can process that stuff and liberate yourself so you can empower yourself to move forward and not feel pulled into that all the time. Because if you don't deal with this, you are constantly going to get crushed. You're going to constantly go into those triggered states. That is not going to help you rebuild your life. That's not going to help you build happiness, sanity, well-being, peace, and success in your life. You have to deal with this. It's not fair that it happened to you, but it is what it is. And you can't change that. But what you can change is your life. And that changes when you take responsibility for yourself. So I hope this video was helpful for you. If it was, give it a like or let me know in the comments below. If you have some tips that I didn't mention that you would like to share with people, I would love it if you leave that in the comments below as well. I'm sending you a big hug.